I think the key word in my credentials is business systems development. Most likely nobody, you've never met anybody like that before. And it turns out that it's actually a pretty specialized skill. But I have a lot of training, a lot of education from Microsoft, and decades of experience developing business systems. And my late wife died from cancer in Maryland, and so I crash landed in Florida. And I started working on the Trump campaign, and then they asked me to take a look at the voting system. They knew I was a smart guy, but they didn't know I was a business system developer. And so for the last year and a half, I've been working full-time on the Florida voting system, trying to figure out what to do to fix it. It really is a unique skill, and the way I look at stuff, a lot of times I say stuff that seems really simple and straightforward to me, and nobody understands what the hell I'm talking about. So that may be the case tonight. Now, I took advantage of the fact, this opportunity to go ahead and try to pull a lot of stuff together, not just for you, but for other people. This is going to get widely distributed. I hope we can get some airtime with it. I had a big problem trying to figure out how to handle the speech, because there's so much that's happened in the last year and a half. If I really wanted to talk to you about everything that's been done, we never get, the whole hour would be gone on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a little bit of an introduction. I'm going to tell you a couple short stories, because those are interesting. And then we're going to go right into what is it we should actually be doing. Okay, and there's a lot of different projects, and I'm hoping that you guys will pick up some of these and try to work on them. And even if you don't want to work on it, maybe you can get other people in other counties and other groups to work on them, because they don't necessarily have to be solved by your county. Okay? All right, so the first story, for 25 years I worked for the Westinghouse Radar Systems Division in Baltimore. And I don't know how many of you know this or not, but there was actually a radar system at Pearl Harbor. And that radar system picked up the Japanese planes coming. And they saw them on the radar, and they picked up the phone, and they called the guys, we got a whole bunch of planes coming here, we don't know what they are, what do we do? And the guy on the other end of the phone said, well, don't worry about it, because there's a flight of B-17s that we're expecting to come in, so you have nothing to worry about. Now, these people had been told that there was going to be an attack because the Japanese in Washington were shutting things down. Okay? Plus, the Japanese, for years, had told everybody that if you cut off our oil, we're going to attack, we're going to go to war. And we were giving them 94% of their oil. So we cut off their oil, so everybody knew. But the people who were in charge of Pearl Harbor did not have what I would call a war mindset. They should have had planes out patrolling. They even had the planes on the lots at the airfield all stacked up together, so when the Japanese came down the strait, they could just knock them all out in one row. And they did that because they thought the saboteurs were the government side. So they weren't on a war mentality side. Well, guess what? We're in a war right now that's a lot worse than the Japanese and the Germans. We're in much more danger now than they were. And it's not us. It's our kids and our grandchildren. That's what's really at stake here. And that's what motivates me, and that's why I'm doing this. Okay, now the second story is there's an HBO, a Disney Plus show on Tom Brady and the Patriots. And there's 10 episodes, and it talks about his career from when they went through the first round, where they won the first 3 Super Bowls in 4 years, off where they had sort of a 10-year hiatus, and then he came back again, he won again, and then he came down to Tampa, and he won the Super Bowl again. So they talked about his career and what it was like for him to be there. So they, shortly after the beginning of the show, they had a guy on the team who was considered to be the #1 defensive guy on the whole team, which meant literally almost all of football, the #1 defense guy. And they came in one day, and that guy was fired, and he was gone. And that was a Tuesday. And on Wednesday, he had a job with another team. And on Thursday, the Patriots played that team. And they got slaughtered. They lost 31-0. They never lost like that before. So the question is, everybody's going around saying, what the hell is wrong with the coach? What in the hell is he doing? Okay. Well, the reason he did it because this guy wasn't part of the team. He wasn't really working well as a team, and he decided to get rid of him, no matter how good he was, because the team came first. The team was ahead of everything. This is the kind of mindset that you guys have to have. It has to be a team. As Eisenhower said, teams are what win wars. Now, what happened after this, of course, was at the end of the season, it came back around again, and the Patriots played the same team, and this time they beat them 31-0. Because they had gotten their act together and pulled things off and become a real team again. And that's why they were so tough to beat. And that's why they're literally the best team that's ever been in the history of football. And every one of those people know that their goal is to win the game. It's to get the ball across and score touchdowns and win the game. And they're only playing football, whereas we have the lives of our children and grandchildren at stake. We've got to have a mindset that we're going to beat these guys and win this kind of stuff. Okay, now the third story is from a guy named James Bond Stockdale, and he was an admiral in the Vietnam War, and he was shot down, and he was captured, for 7 years, and he was tortured and starved for 7 years. And when he came back, he talked about the people that survived that experience and the people who didn't survive. And he said the people who were really optimistic, they didn't make it because their hearts got broken and they weren't going to make it. And the people that were really pessimistic, they didn't make it because they figured they were done for anyway. So they all died. But the people that made it were the ones that could see the situation exactly for what it was and had the faith and belief that they were going to make it through. So we have to be the same way. We have to see the situation that we're in exactly for what it is, as bad as it is. And we have to have the faith that we're going to be able to come back and win. Okay? And I am very confident that that's going to happen. We're going to win. We're going to beat these guys at the end. Okay? All right, so let's go on. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about is Cleta Mitchell and what the Trump Republican team is doing to help us out. So Cleta Mitchell is a lawyer who's involved in court cases as a result of all the election problems, and Trump kept her on, and she's put together a strategy to develop a way to suppress the voting fraud. And basically the way it works is every place, every county's got to have a really good voter integrity committee or team that's going to work on stuff. And basically what they're going to do is going to go out and suppress the fraud. You're going to be all over these guys so that they know somebody's watching. And we're going to hope that that's going to help them prevent them from doing stuff. Now, to get these teams to work, okay, I'm really pushing for the Republican executive committees to be the main leaders on this. And there's a lot of problems with getting them to work. So the first thing is you need somebody that has managerial and executive skills. And that's going to be tough to get. You got to have people that are really serious, that really want to work. If you guys are involved in something, try to make sure that you have at least 4 people who are dead serious, because you got 4 of you together, and you have to go talk to somebody. All 4 of you can go together, and they're going to have a tough time standing up to 4 people who are really serious. Next thing is learn Robert's Rules of Order. Now, the Republican parties are all governed by Robert's Rules of Order, and the rules are exceptionally good. They're called out in state law, and they provide a good balance between having individuals cause chaos in the group and working, and at the same time allowing the relevant majority to take over. So one of the things that I have that you can get a copy of is a cheat sheet for Robert's Rules. You can also get a copy of Robert's Rules for Dummies. But if you're going to go into the Republican Party and you're going to try to get those guys to do what needs to be done, you're going to need the rules, because that's the only thing that's going to work. Okay? Another issue is I've had people tell me, well, we just couldn't get anything done because everybody had their own opinion about what should be done. Everybody had their own opinion. And, so like if my opinion is even if you have a penis, you can still be a woman. I mean, that's ridiculous. But that's, if this was a group of Democrats, they'd probably say, boy, that's a smart guy. He knows what he's talking about. So you don't get to have an opinion unless you can back it up. You have to have critical thinking. If you're in one of these meetings and you've got an opinion about something, you better back it up, okay? And don't hold up the group for your opinion if you don't have anything to back it up with. All right, another thing that's a really big issue is how do you handle these groups, government people, like for example, the supervisor of elections, or the sheriffs, or the legislatures, or the secretary of state? How do you handle those people when they don't really care what you think? Okay, they really don't. Okay, so one of the things you have to do is you have to use a very formal process, and you have to make written requests to them to do things. For example, one of the things that we want to do with the supervisors of elections is to formally request that they take action to fix the voter registration system based on specific problems that we give them that are solid factual problems. We would expect them to go fix that stuff, but you have to make it a written request. You have to expect a written response, because what you really want is for them to come back and fall on their own swords. Either ignore your written request or come back to something that's utter nonsense. And that's going to give you an issue to apply political pressure to them. Either run against them or do something else. So you've got to do that. You've got to be very formal. You've got to have a backing of the group. And you've got to do everything in writing. Otherwise, I'm telling you right now, they don't care what you think. They're not going to do anything you say, period. Okay? All right, now, one other thing is, just a quick mention on this, that in my earlier years, I also did a lot of work with what's called Japanese quality circles. And those are the tools that the Japanese almost wiped out the U.S. auto industry with. So you can look those up in Wikipedia, but basically what they are is they're a way for groups to learn to work together to solve problems. And they give you specific tools that you can use. There are things like fishbone diagrams and control charts and stuff like that. And they teach you how to use those, and they teach you how to work as a group. So I would encourage you guys, if you're in a group and you want to take your group to the next level in terms of performance and working together, take a look at that stuff. And remember that if you want to influence the legislatures, okay, they're not going to listen to you if you don't have something really solid factual. And I'm telling you, we've been up there a couple times talking to them, and we had a bunch of what I would call little old ladies who went out and they had the facts and numbers, and they were the most convincing guys we had. They were the most effective ones we had, because you could tell that they knew what they were talking about and that they had the facts to back them up. All right, next slide. Okay, so all right, now here's something you can do that's really easy, that's a big deal. Okay, so there's a lot of problems. I'm sure you've heard there's a lot of problems with the voter registration database. Okay? Well, it turns out that there's a company called True NCOA, which stands for Notification of Change of Address. That's what NCOA stands for. And what they do is they get all the change of address information from the Postal Service. So they know everybody that's moved. Okay? So Henry Czar was one of our guys, and one of the things he did was he took the 1.5 million records in the Miami-Dade registration database, and for $20, they ran it through their system, and he came back with a list of 95,000 people who had moved, which is about 7%. And that's probably what it would be for you guys. I'm guessing you probably have about 17,000 people that have moved. Now, of course, the first question is, if that's all you got to do, why hasn't the supervisor of elections already done it? Okay? Now, the second part of this is, okay, so you got this list of people. Well, one of the things you need to do right now is make sure that they don't send vote-by-mail ballots to these guys, because they've moved, okay? And if they do send vote-by-mail ballots to them, the next question is, where did the ballots go? Okay, did they come back? Okay, we've had people from other states say they got put into the recycle bin, which was a Democrat pickup truck. Okay. And then they were recycled. So that's something else you can do. Let's see. Oh, another reason for doing this is we're trying to take out ERIC. Okay, now ERIC is this system that was set up by George Soros. Okay, and it's the kiss of death as far as I'm concerned. And because what we're doing is we're giving them all the information that they need to request vote-by-mail ballots. They can go through and figure out, they get the DMV information, and so they know everybody who's got a driver's license, and they know everybody that's got a vote, who's registered to vote, and then they say, well, what's the difference? Who's got a driver's license, but who hasn't registered to vote? And then they go after those guys. They got a list of them, okay? So we got to stop that, okay? And this could be one of the ways we can do it, because I've talked to this guy, Don Rubin, who's the chief of staff for the House Elections Committee, and he said, well, we're getting all this data from these guys, you know, it's a good thing. So my first question is, well, how much of that can we get from just true NCOA? They wouldn't get it all from those guys, okay? Because most people, when they move, are going to fill out a change of address form. Most people are going to do that. If they don't do that, we could also go and work out some deals with separate states to electronically check the information ourselves. We don't need those guys. We got to get rid of those guys. We got to get rid of it now. One of our people, Henry Zarb, has already had a couple conversations with the Secretary of State about this. Okay, so they know about it. And the best news I had was that Henry told me, well, they told us not to talk about what they said. So I take that as a pretty good sign, because I mean, maybe they're going to do something and they don't want anybody to know about it. So let's just keep our fingers crossed that they're going to take those guys out. But if they don't, you guys got to be part of the effort to take them out, because we can't give that information to George Soros and those guys. Okay, next one. Next one.
Can you tell us more about ERIC, or what ERIC stands for, please?
I don't actually know what it stands for. Does anybody know what ERIC means?
Yes, Election Registration Information Center.
Okay, there you go. Okay. Go back one more.
Go back
to
one
number
more.
6. Go back to 6. There we go. Okay. All right, so how many election crimes have you heard about that have been prosecuted? Now we're estimating that the fraud rate is about 10%, which is about 1 million votes. And yet, now I know they have done some. I know they have prosecuted some crimes, because when we were up in Tallahassee, that came up at one of the committee meetings up there, and one of our good guy congressman was saying, yeah, he was listing off a bunch of them, but basically they're not doing anything. Okay, the way I say it, it's like a wheel, wagon that the wheels have come off of it. It's just not going. So we've got to get that going. Okay, and one of the ways to do it, there's basically two things we can do. One is to go after the private mailbox crimes. Now I put together a list of these for you guys, but you only got one private mailbox crime, and you got about 10 people that are voting out of businesses where they don't live. Okay, now that's a crime too. Private mailbox one is the best crime, because when you register to vote, it asks you where you live. And if you put down a mailbox and you don't live there, that's a third-degree felony, because you're lying on the form. So that's a big deal. But we've got to take whatever crimes we can get in whatever counties we can get and push those into the system, so that the bad guys know that if they do something, they might get caught and they might get prosecuted. So even though you guys only got about 10 of the crimes, presumably that means because your supervisor of elections is doing a pretty good job of not allowing people to register out of post offices. Okay? And by comparison, in Broward, there's 800 of those. There's 800 people that have registered to vote out of post offices in Broward County. Okay, so the second place that the crimes are going to come from is from Defend Florida. Yeah. Okay, let's go on to the next slide.
All right.
Okay, so Defend Florida had 300 plus volunteers, and over 20 years period, they put in 150,000 man hours to go out and find out about 8,671 voters. Now, the thing that's a little bit tricky is that they hand-picked those people, so to speak, over the computer, and they picked people who voted in 2020 and haven't voted in a while. I don't know this for sure, but I think the number is 10 years, okay? Now, the problem with that is that you can't generalize across the whole population from a sample like that because it's not random. However, they found a hell of a lot of problems, okay? So their main problem is with people that they call phantom voters. Now, if you're dead, okay, and you vote, you're not voting out of the place you live because you're dead. If you've moved and you're voting, you're not voting out of your place of residence because you've moved. Okay? If you're voting out of a mailbox, you're not voting out of your place of residence because you don't live in a mailbox. Same thing is true with businesses. So basically, all of their stuff is those kinds of people. Both of it is their kinds of people. However, they did have some cases where, you know, you go out and ask somebody, did you vote? And they say, no, I didn't vote. And it says, yeah, you did. Or they say, I went down to vote and they told me I had already voted when I had. Okay? Now, the people in Lake County are doing it. So what they're saying is, if that happens to you, call the sheriff and say your identity's been stolen. And get them to go after the case as an identity theft case. And I think that's a terrific idea. That came from a woman named Mary, who used to be in law enforcement in Lake County. Okay, the bottom line with Defend Florida's data, it's a big problem. Okay, they found enough that there should be enough to convince anybody, but it's not working. Because I've talked to people from the Republican Party who told me that I'm crazy when I say that there's a problem with the voting system. And we're estimating that the fraud rate is 10%, and we're basing it on a lot of considerations. And we think we're basically right. But even if we're off by 100%, that would still mean the fraud rate is 5%, which is 500,000 votes. You know, so I lost my train of thought there for a second. All right, let me just pick up and keep going, okay? All right, so the bottom line is the Defend Florida rate is, I know where I was going. So the bottom line is the Defend Florida rate is about 24%, and we've got the Republicans not believing it. So it's what I call the Republican version of the global warming hoax. You know, I had one guy call me up. He was the chairman of the Republican Executive Committee, and he begged me not to do anything because he said, well, there's no problem with the voting fraud. And if you go around telling everybody that there is, people aren't going to turn out and vote because they think there's a problem. That's what he told me, and that's what he actually believed. Okay? And it's just not true. The problems are very big and very tough to deal with. Okay, so this is one of the things in red. One of the biggest problems that we have with all of this is that the way the Florida laws are written, okay? They're deliberately written to be confusing and contradictory, and every time somebody puts something in there that's a good thing, they right away turn around and do something else to neuter it and undermine it. And you'll see an example of that in just a minute. It's just absolutely maddening. So a major effort has to be made to fix the Florida voting laws, because that's where an awful lot of the problems come from. All right, next slide, number 8. Okay, so here's another problem, okay? So I'm sure that you all know that if you get a vote by mail ballot and you sign the envelope and put your ballot in there, if they send that into their system and they check your signature that's on file. And that's how they authenticate you. And they will tell you that they almost never have a problem. They can always authenticate you that your ballot is legitimate and valid, and you got nothing to worry about if you're worried about fraud. Okay? So there's a couple of major problems with that. One is that about half of the signatures right now are coming from the DMV, and they're using a tablet with a finger to write a signature. And there's no way that you can compare a digital signature with a wet signature on an envelope. So one of the projects here is to go after that issue. And I'm suggesting a 6-pack. Okay, so the way it would work is I would sign Wesley A. Huff on a tablet, then I would take a piece of paper and I would sign Wesley A. Huff on that. Then I would get 5 other people to sign Wesley A. Huff on separate pieces of paper. And I would give it to these guys and say, here's my digital signature, which one is the real Wesley A. Huff? And let's see if they can pick it out. So that's a project you guys can pick up if you want to do that, okay? And it will give you some clout, okay? Because again, about half the signatures on new registrations are coming from the DMV. And they're going to be digital signatures. And it's not, my sense is this, you know, but at the end of the day, what we really want is what I call a process capability study. We want to hire an outside accounting firm to come in and we'll do a real study on how accurate this stuff is. Because another thing that we believe happens is, you know, they have these machines that check the signatures, and you can set the tolerance and sensitivity at any point you want. And so if you're a bad guy and you're the supervisor, you just set it to 0, and everything just goes through, no problem. So there's no real checks or controls on it. Now, they've changed the law, okay, so that they're going to allow people to start coming in and observing that process. So that's something that you ought to try to get involved with if you can. Okay, now, again, really what you're going to want to look for is digital signatures, okay, compared to a wet signature. So if you get a chance to do that, and they come and they let you in for 45 minutes, and you get to see a tiny fraction of the ballots, you can raise that issue. It says, hey, what about all the digital signatures? Can I see some of those? All right. One of the best things that's happened to us is that we managed to get the former Secretary of State fired. So I think there's a lot of people that worked on that, a lot of people put a lot of effort into it, and it's one of the best things that's happened to us. The Secretary of State has a tremendous amount of power over the election process. Right now, we think he's a really good guy, but you know, like everybody, he has political problems he has to deal with, okay? And the more support he has from people, and the more data that he has, and the more people are pressuring him to do the right thing, the better his chances are of being able to do the right thing. So you got to take advantage of the fact that this is a great opportunity we have here to actually get something done through the Secretary of State. All right, let's keep going here. All right, let's get the next one. Okay, go to number 10. Okay, so the question is, why do the politicians like these vote by mail ballots so much? I mean, and the reason is because they publish lists of them. So if you're an incumbent and you have a lot of money, you can get a list of everybody that's got a vote by mail ballot. You can go track them down. You can send a couple of your guys around to help you vote. You know, don't worry, we'll turn in your ballot for you. Just give it to us. We'll turn it in for you, no problem. Okay? That's why they like it. Okay? And that's very bad for the rest of us. Okay. All right, so what's the long-term solution for ballots? That's the next slide. Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to have a zero tolerance for fraud. Okay? But really, we're going to have to get rid of the vote by mail ballots mostly. That's what everybody is recommending. You know, 75% of the world doesn't even use them. Okay. The next thing you can do is, if you are going to issue one, what you want to do is put a serial number on the ballot, just like you have a serial number on your $100 bill, and write down the serial number of whoever you get the ballot to. Okay. That way, you'll know you'll have the voter and the ballot paired together, and that will cut down the voting fraud. Just as an interesting story, in Miami-Dade, a long time ago, they had really serious problems with vote by mail ballots. And they reached the conclusion that whoever got the most ballots won the election. And so if you had a suitcase full of ballots that were phony and you showed up, you would lose to a guy on a pickup truck full of ballots, who would lose to a guy who had a semi-truck full of ballots. And they finally dawned on them that, you know, that this isn't an election, it's just who could create the most fraud. Okay? And so they passed a pretty good law, and they pretty much stopped it. So they actually have one of the better systems now to prevent this kind of stuff. And that's how it came about. Okay, let's go on to number 12. Okay. So now I'm sure you've all heard about the voting machines. Okay, and all the horrible stories about that. Well, it turns out there's actually a really simple solution to that, and we've actually talked to the Secretary of State about it, okay? So here's the way it works. After you have an election, you have to have an audit to check to see if the machines are counting right. Okay? But you have a choice. And again, this is one of those things where somebody wrote a really, really good law, and they put it in, and as soon as they did that, the bad guys came right along after them and just wiped it out. And I don't know, I can't imagine from my wildest dreams why they would do that, except that they're just bad, really bad people. Okay? So what they did was, they said, you have two choices, and one of them is you can do what's called a manual audit. So what they do is if they're doing it right, they're really following procedures, which frequently they don't do, they'll take 3x5 cards or business cards and write down all the precincts on one set of cards, and then they'll write down all the races on another set of cards, and they'll put them in a couple of hats. Then they'll reach in and they'll pull one precinct out and one race, and they'll go get the ballots for that and hand count them. Okay? Now, for Orange County, which is the one place where we suspect the insiders are actually changing the vote totals themselves, they picked question number 1 to audit. That was their audit. And then what do? They go around and they tell everybody, all 67 counties have audited the counts of the voting machines, and they've never found a problem. They've never found a problem. That's because they're checking question 1. Okay? They're not counting their ballots. Now, the other way that you can do it, which is a real audit, is you randomly select 20% of the precincts. You go get the paper ballots for each precinct, 3,000 or 4,000, if that's how many it is. You take them to another place, you have a separate machine that's air-gapped, and you recount them on the separate machine. And if the totals on that machine don't match the totals that you reported on election night, you got a serious problem. Okay? Now, so we talked to the Secretary of State about this. And one of the Secretary of State's jobs is to actively make sure that the state laws are working. So the argument was, well, look, here's the law, the manual, which everybody does, and it's not working. And everybody knows that it's not going to work because it's basic common sense. So you should actively monitor this and get rid of that section and tell them not to do it anymore. So we're hoping that he's going to do that before the upcoming election. I think it's going to be a real test on how good he really is. Okay. All right, so that's basically the issue. All of the stuff that you've heard about the voting machines, the Chinese communists, the insiders, the changing of the source code to put in algorithms, stuff, the modems, and the hacking, all that stuff can all be fixed with just this audit. That's all you would have to do. And let me just say one more thing about the Region Program. If you're going to put fraud into the system, you can't put all the fraud into one precinct because you will blow it out, and everybody will notice that there's something happening. Because everybody, you know, hey, last time it was only 70%, now it's 99%, you know, how can that be, you know? So you have to spread the fraud across multiple precincts, and if you do that, you can pick it up with a random warrant like that. So that's why that will work. All right, on to the next one. Okay, number 13, fixing the registration database. Okay, so I've got a standard data package that I put together for Microsoft Access. It includes a range of things. One of the things it includes is people who live in apartments, who didn't give their apartment number when they registered to vote. Okay, you guys are in pretty good shape. You got only about 450 of those. Other counties have got like 5,000 of those. And overall across the whole state, there's about 200,000, which is a big deal because DeSantis only won this election by 30,000 or 40,000 votes. Another thing that I've got is there's a Postal Service specification called Publication 28, which tells how you have to address mail. And of course, one thing that says is you've got to have a complete address. You can't mail something to someone if you don't know their apartment number. You don't put that on the address. But they also have something called the secondary unit designators. That's something like APT for apartment, and LOT for lot, or TRL, or PH for penthouse. And those are things that have been created by the Postal Service as a way to identify what kind of address it is. Okay? So they were created by the Postal Service because they had useful information. And there's a specification on how you're supposed to do that. Well, almost nobody does that. There's only one county, Collier, that actually follows the rules. So here we have a situation where we've got 66 supervisors of elections, and we're supposed to trust them to follow all these rules and do all this complicated stuff, and they won't follow the rules of the Postal Service with the addresses. So how can we trust them to do the other things, right, if they can't even do that? That's the power of that argument, and that's why it's such a good argument. If you're not gonna follow the rules of the Postal Service, get somebody else to deliver your mail. Okay, so using the true NCOA, the true deceased data to eliminate dead people, that's something that's really good. That's something that needs to be done. That's something you guys can do. We can help you get the data. It's not that hard to do. It's something that you should really work on, okay? All right, next slide. Okay, now this is something from Cleta Mitchell's group. So Carrie Tokolotsko, I guess that's how you pronounce it. She's kind of the leader of the group, and with Michelle Miller too. Now these guys are pretty good. So they have a bunch of stuff that's really pretty good. For example, they have a set of slides on dealing with vulnerable voters, okay? And they have a set of slides on how to deal with registration issues. And they're pretty good. So, I mean, this one, I would say not everything on here is really great, but these are the kind of questions that you can go in and talk to the supervisor of elections about. And you can consider, okay, what you're trying to do with this kind of stuff is, hey, we're watching you, we're concerned about whether you're doing your job or not. We want to know that you're doing things right, okay? And this is the kind of stuff that you can do that. So I like all of their stuff. They have a citizen's guide. I gave out some copies like this. I still got some more of them. This is a roadmap on how to set up a voter integrity group and what you should do. And it's really quite excellent, okay? And it's backed by Trump, and it's backed by DeSantis, and it's backed by the Secretary of State. So it's got solid. It's not, however, backed by a RPOF, okay, which is really interesting. Okay. All right. So next slide, number 15. Okay. All right. So what are we going to do about the voter registration database? Well, first thing is, the way it is right now, I'm going to just tell you flat out, it can't be fixed. I'm a database guy. I've been working on this stuff for a long time now, and it can't be fixed the way the laws are written right now. And in fact, you know, if you have a good supervisor of elections who's trying to do their job, they can't do it. Okay. So what are you going to do to fix it? Well, first thing you got to do is you got to fix the laws, okay? Because some of them are really bad. Okay. They made a couple of changes this year that are improvements, but before they did that, one of the worst things about it was that there was no way to deregister. Now, what I mean by that is they have all these deregistration paths depending on what your condition is. But you have to drop into one of those paths in order to be deregistered. So for example, if I moved to New York and died, I would never be deregistered. Because there's nothing that ever kicked me. They would never get a notice of my death certificate. They would never send me a card or a postcard or anything like that. They would never know I was dead. So there's nothing to kick into that. Now they did make some improvements in that, within that latest round of legislation, which is a good thing, but it's still not going to be good enough. Okay, so what we need is better technology. Okay, and we need technology to help people put the information in. Like, for example, don't put anybody in the database who has a commercial address, okay, or is a post office. The computers would easily know that. You just put all those addresses into the system, and nobody gets to be registered at one of those addresses. And if you try to type one of those addresses, then the computer will come back and say, can't do that. That's a commercial business. You can't register somebody to vote like that. And the same thing is true with the syntaxes on the secondary unit designators and where people have apartment numbers. You know, if somebody registered to vote, computer says, where's the apartment number? Okay. And oh, by the way, this is a marina, so it should be whatever the secondary unit is for a marina. Computers should know all that. But the next big thing is when you think about credit cards, you know, if you all remember what it was like when you applied for a credit card. Well, they certainly know who you are. They didn't have any problem finding out who you are. They know everything about you. You know, how many loans you've had, what your mortgage payments were. I mean, they know everything about you. okay? So what we need to do is we need to take the voter registration database and dump it into a system like that, and have it go through and clear people. Not necessarily find the people that are bad, but clear the people that are good. Everybody in this room would be cleared like that if you dumped into that kind of system. Because you're all legitimate, you all have phone numbers, you all have credit cards, you all have mortgages, you all have lots of history. It would be a piece of cake to clear all of it. But the people who are, phantom voters who don't live at their addresses, those people would all be flagged, and then they could be investigated. Okay? So that's what needs to be done to fix the system. I'm talking to people about that, but it's one of those things where only the business systems developers seem to understand that. Okay. All right. Next thing. All right. So if you own a bank, okay, and you want to wire transfer some money out of the bank, what do you think you have to do that? Okay. Well, there's going to be multiple forms of authentication to make sure that you have the authority to do it. There's going to be records of who did it and when the money went. And people are going to come back and they're going to audit those records. Okay? And they're going to sit down and they're going to tell you how much money did we start out with and where did it go and how much money did we end up with. And they're going to make sure it all tracks and it's all proper and it's all accurate. Because those are called system controls. Well, there's almost nothing of that, none of that in the voting system. There's almost no system controls on any of these processes that we have. A really good example is, let's say that you request a vote by mail ballot. Okay? Well, you're supposed to put in, if you do a postcard type request, you're supposed to put in your driver's license or your state ID or the last 4 digits of your social security number. Okay, well, let's say you do that. Well, the first question is, do they actually check? Okay, will they actually take your driver's license and check to make sure that it's valid before they send you one? Okay. The next thing is, you're a legal alien and you just made up a number. Okay. A lot of them will probably give you a ballot anyway. Okay. So you have to have people who are auditing that and checking that to make sure that they're following the rules. And there's a lot of rules with the vote by mail ballots, and you guys got to learn how to take a look at some of that stuff, and you got to get the Secretary of State to do it too. Because the Secretary of State should be having people come down here and audit that kind of stuff. So your basic strategy would be to take one of these problems and do enough work to show that an audit is justified, okay, that there's a serious problem. And that's not as hard as you might think. Once you get that, then you go to Secretary of State, or better yet, you go to some other counties and they do the same thing. And you all go to the Secretary of State, look, this is what we're finding. Nobody's following these rules. You better put in some system to audit this stuff, and you better start sending people to jail if they don't do it. That's the way it's got to work. And then we should hire a big accounting firm to come in and look at this stuff. I mean, these guys, they go into businesses all the time. They tell them how to run their business. They can come in and do that. Go through it, and tell us how should we set up the system so that it can be audited and checked by everybody. And if you would do that, that would mean that we could all go back to our regular lives and not have to worry every 2 years about the elections being stolen. So that's really what's kind of at stake. All right, next slide. Protecting vulnerable voters. Let's go on to the next one, number 8. Okay, so this is a slide that came from the Seminole County door knockers, some of my favorite buddies. Okay, so they went around and they looked at 8 facilities, 2 independent living, 3 assisted living, 1 long-term care, and 2 drug facilities. And so this is how many voters they had, 337, and of those, 137 didn't live there before, which is about a third, okay? And then here's how many vote by mail ballots you have. So you take this guy and you stack it on top of that, you find out that most of the people voted by mail. But the key thing is that those people are not there. Okay, they're not there. And I mean, if a bunch of our guys can go knock on the door and find out about that, why can't the supervisor of elections do that? All right, next slide. Legislative strategy. So how am I doing? Where are we on time?
You're doing great.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay, well, this next section is a lot of stuff, okay? Let's just go on up to slide 25, okay? Okay, so basically, I'm gonna go through and mark up the laws again. This will be my third time. And I'm gonna try to take everything that everybody's given me, everything everybody's seen, and go through and try to do it as common sense as I can. And I'm gonna keep my fingers crossed and hope I can get people to listen to me. But this is one of the things that we gave the legislature last year to try to get them to do. And the first one is a 5-year sunset provision. So you would automatically deregister people if they don't vote after 5 years. That would be a tremendous help to the registration system because it would be automatic. It would kick you out, okay? You know, you can't. In Pinellas County, they still had somebody that was registered to vote actively who was born in 1890. I mean, good grief. I mean, how hard is it to figure out that you got somebody who was born?
And they voted every time, too.
Well, I don't think they're voting. That's voting much, okay? All right, now the next one is put serial numbers on the ballots at the precinct level. Okay, this is something you guys should push for in your group. Now, right now, there's part of the state law allows you to put control numbers on the ballots. Now, the control numbers, the purpose of it is to identify the ballot down to basically the precinct level. So you need to know which race it is, you know which county it is, which precinct it is. Okay, so you've got a lot of information already on the ballot that you got to put on there. So the thing you do is when you print the next round of ballots, tell them the number of them. Okay, if you send in an order for 3,000 ballots for the precinct, tell them the number of them from 1 to 3,000. Just get the numbers on the ballots. And that will do a lot to help suppress the fraud and the ballot harvesting. Good.
Why wouldn't it be, or wouldn't it be effective to either add or in place of that, use barcodes or QR codes?
Well, yeah, but essentially what those do is they have a serial number embedded in it. Okay, so it's still the same concept. Just like a $100 bill, you got to have a serial number on it.
Wouldn't that make it easier to audit them though?
Sure. There's a lot of technical choices for that. If you look at some of the ballots from Europe, you'll see that's what you'll see. They'll have all kinds of QR codes and barcodes on it and all that kind of stuff. So it's not rocket science to do, but still the thing is, each one of them has got to have a unique identifier, and you do need to number them because you want to know that you got 3,000 ballots. So if you get a number that's above 3,000, you're going to know that's bogus, okay?
Or duplicate.
Or duplicate, that's right. Okay, so the next one is to use the standard uniform voter registration form. Okay, so one of the things that they do is they have lots of different ways you can register to vote. Okay, and if you're in the DMV, they will register you to vote even if you don't ask them to. That's a major problem right now. Okay, and they're not requiring you to fill out the standard uniform voter registration form. Now, that form is much more than it appears on the surface. It is a system control. And one of the things that you want it to do is you want it to control whether or not illegal aliens are registering to vote, because there's a checkbox on there that says you've got to be a citizen. And if you check that box and you're not a citizen, it's a third-degree felony. And the same thing is with the mailboxes. When you put your address down, it says, where do you live, not a P.O. box. And so if you lie on that, you can be prosecuted as a third-degree felony. And that's what makes the form so important, because it's a system control. And they don't use it a lot of places. So that was the point of this whole thing is, if you're gonna stick with this whole concept of how you register things and use a form, let's get everybody to use the same form, the same standard form, okay? Okay, then the next one is what we talked about earlier about putting in the 20% audits to shut down the voting machine fraud. And then there's a section in the law that, again, that allows you to register to vote. Now, if you live in an apartment and you have an apartment number, you don't have to give it. So that's it says one thing here, and in the very next sentence it says exactly the opposite. And that's something that makes the legislature look really stupid, I think. It makes the laws look really stupid because they directly contradict each other. Okay, so let's take another minute here and now this is go to the next slide, 26. This is normally where I would have started from, okay? But I felt like it was really more important to talk about the projects. But we'll do a couple things out of this section anyway. So the first, all right, so go on to the next slide. Okay, so now this is a picture of Detroit in 1960, and this is a picture of Hiroshima in 1945. And in 1960, Detroit was the premier city in the world. And there were 2 million people, yeah, the premier city in the world. And that was because of the war in the automobile industry. So after they stopped making tanks, there they started making cars. And they became the premier city. Well, all right, go to the next slide. Okay, now this is what Hiroshima looks like now. And this is what Detroit looks like now. And the difference is because the Democrats got control of the voting system. And that's what you did. You can see that now in Oregon, where they're burning down their own cities. Okay? Okay, next slide. This next one's pretty interesting too. Okay, so in 1982, there was a governor's race in Illinois, and the governor was ahead by 60 to 40 throughout the whole state. 20% lead, big double-digit lead, and he almost lost the election. He just barely won. And the reason that he almost lost is because they voted 3-1 against him in Chicago. So Reagan sent the FBI in. That was in the days before the FBI was run by organized crime. And they really were serious law enforcement. And so they went in and they found all the stuff that we're still having. You know, dead people voting, people living in vacant lots voting, people voting from addresses where they don't live. Where have we heard that? Prison inmates voting, illegal aliens voting, fictitious voting. You know, and they just sent in enough FBI agents that they could go track down everything. And they sent a lot of people to jail. Well, as a result of that, in 1984, the Democrats figured they were going to lose anyway, and there was no point in going to jail. So anyway, so what happened? Reagan won 49 states. That's never happened since then. But it was all because he went after them. And that's why we have to get some of these cases prosecuted. That's why that's our best shot. Okay, next slide. Okay, this one is called political ponerology, which is the science of evil, psychopathy, and the origins of totalitarianism. And this came about because a guy who was a psychologist in Eastern Europe after the war, he was studying people and he noticed that most people were just like us. Most people want good things for their neighbors. They want good things for themselves, they want good things for their neighbors. You know, they want to have a good community. So he says to himself, well, wait a minute, if everybody's good, then how come all this terrible stuff is happening? And so he set out to try to figure this out. He figured, I'm going to go study these people who were the leaders, and he came back and he concluded that all the leaders were psychopaths. And it's really true. It's really true. They're psychopaths. Now, psychopaths have no empathy. So a psychopath would not bother a psychopath to burn down a city in Portland, Oregon City. It wouldn't bother them at all to burn down that city and put all those people, those hardworking businessmen, out of jobs, to ruin their lives. That would not bother them because they don't have any empathy. And they're also exceptionally good liars. There's a standard story in a book by this guy named Robert Hare, which talks about the psychopaths who live among us. So there was a high school teacher who was a psychopath, and he mistreated his wife all the time. But he was extremely effective as a social person, extremely effective liar, and everybody liked him. Everybody thought he was a great guy. So he didn't look like Darth Vader, okay? He looked like a really nice guy that everybody liked. But he mistreated her all the time. He mentally tortured her, he beat her, he stole her money. So finally, what happened was, he took one of his high school kids, girls, young underage high school kids, and he ran off with her. And so 2 weeks after that, her friends came up to her and they said to her, what did you do to upset him so much and drive him off like that? Yeah. And so that's how tough these psychopaths are to deal with, because they can convince everybody that they're fine. The other thing is there's the gangsterization of the Democratic Party. I mean, Hillary and the Clintons have done that. All right, let's do one more thing, and then we'll go. Okay, on to the social construction of reality. Okay, so you're in the first grade, and you come to school, and your teacher tells you that we're going to celebrate Thanksgiving because the Indians taught the white men how to grow food. And as a result of that, the white men were so prosperous that they celebrated Thanksgiving. And then the white men turned around and exterminated the Indians and took all their land. And that's the story of Thanksgiving that you would learn as a kid. Now, what are you going to say to that as a kid? You can't say anything to that. The truth of the story is, of course, that they celebrated the end of socialism. What made them so prosperous was they stopped a socialist system and switched to a strict capitalist economy, and then everybody prospered, because what was happening under a socialist system was a lot of people just wouldn't work, because it was, why bother? They're not going to get anything for it, so they wouldn't work. So when they switched to capitalism and free markets, they prospered. But that's not the story that gets taught to these kids, and they believe it, and it becomes internalized in them. So later in their life, you come up to them and you say, that's not the true story of Thanksgiving. They're not going to believe you, because if they believe you, they're going to have to accept the fact that they're a total idiot for being scammed. Okay? And they just can't do that psychologically. So that's another reason why it's so hard for us to convince some of these guys that what they're doing is just utter nonsense. Okay? Because they've been taught it for so long that they believe it, and if you confront them with it, then they don't want to face the truth about themselves. I used to get onto Facebook, and there was a website which I call a Robert Jordanson hate group after the Canadian psychologist. And I would argue with those guys, and that's exactly the way that they were. You couldn't confront them with anything that's factual, because they just couldn't take it. All right, so, yeah, okay, I can go with one or two more slides. So go to 33. So this is just sort of for your reference. Okay, so here's a list of the voter registration issues they found in Georgia. Okay, and you go to the next slide.
Keep going. I'm going.
Okay, so then here are the vote by mail issues that they found in Georgia. We got all the same stuff. And they found this because Trump gave Matt Brainerd $600,000, and they wouldn't track a lot of this stuff down. Okay, but we got the same stuff. All right, then let's see. All right, well, the next one's on voting machine fraud, and then you know about that. And finally, let's go on to, I guess it's 37. Okay, so what's the fraud rate in Florida? Okay, so this is a good one to know. That's a little typo error in the middle of it. Basically, Biden beat Clinton by 800,000 votes. Did you know that? So if you compare those two, and throughout the whole country, in almost every county, Clinton beat Biden, but not in the key battleground states and not in Florida. We actually figured that Biden lost to Hillary by a couple 100,000 votes, which means that the fraud rate is 1 million votes, which is about 10%. Okay? And that's what we're saying is the fraud rate. And when we look at the defend Florida rate, you know, I've had some marketing people look at that and they say, okay, they're finding 24% with the sample that they choose, so maybe it's 7%. Okay, that might be a good number to go with. So that's another thing that supports the 10% fraud rate. And I'm telling you right now, if I talked to some of the Republican leaders and told them this stuff, they would all say I'm crazy. All right, go to number 38. That's good one too. Okay, let's do that. Okay, so this is the Trump margin of victory by county. So this is a really good chart, and this chart should scare you to death. Okay, so this is Miami-Dade. So Trump lost by 85,000 votes in Miami-Dade. Now the reason that happened was because the Cubans and the Latinos saved our butts. Okay, they did. But not so in Broward County, where he lost by 285,000 Broward's the county's the guys, remember, they got 800 people that are registered to vote out of mailboxes. Okay? And then here's Orange County, which is also really bad. That's the county where I live, and I think a lot of those votes are the result of changing the vote tallies in the machines. Okay? So those are big, big numbers when you look at the fact that DeSantis won by 30 to 40,000 votes. Those are big numbers. This is where things are going to be won or lost, quite frankly. All right, let me take one more quick look here and see if there's anything else that I got. You can get a copy of all this stuff. I think that's a good place to end. You can get a copy of all this stuff. My email address is on the bottom of most of these slides, so just email me if you want a copy of it, or various copies that of everything.
I will email the PDF of this whole presentation, the Tea Party place that I have. So you don't have to look for it from that, so I'll send it out tomorrow or the day after.